If you look into a mirror, you see a single body, a single face, a fixed set of features. And because our physical form is bound to one space at one time, Western culture has spent centuries demanding that your mind do the same thing. We are obsessed with the idea of a coherent identity. We praise people who are consistent. We tell our children to find out who they really are. We treat the human soul like a math equation. It must be logical, it must be balanced, and it must never contradict itself. But if you are completely honest with yourself, you know that this consistency is a facade. Leo felt the weight of this expectation every single day. To his oldest friends, he was the loud, carefree jokester. To his corporate employers, he was the hyper-rational, emotionally detached strategist. To his partner, Clara, he was increasingly sullen, defensive, and cold. Lately, an agonizing thought had begun to take root in Leo's mind. I don't know who I am. I change my shape for everyone I meet. I am inconsistent. I am incoherent. I am fake. He felt like a fraud. He believed that somewhere deep inside him there was a real Leo, but he had lost the map to find him. Every time he tried to strip away the roles he played, he found nothing but an empty, echoing chamber filled with conflicting voices. What Leo didn't know, what none of us are taught, is that his agonizing turmoil wasn't a disease, it was the truth. He wasn't a broken, single machine. He was experiencing the chaotic, beautiful reality of what psychologist Kenneth Gergen calls the multi-being. To understand Leo's torment, we have to look backward. We have to dismantle the Cartesian myth that your mind is an island, an independent, autonomous castle that generates thoughts all by itself. Gergen's theory turns this completely on its head. You do not exist before your relationships. Your relationships create you. Think of a newborn child. It does not enter the world with a fixed personality type locked in its DNA. Instead, the moment it is touched, spoken to, and looked at, the architecture of the self begins to form. Every human interaction you experience from the day you were born leaves a permanent psychological residue. Gergen notes that these residues come from three distinct points of origin within every relationship. The first is the model. When Leo was a child, he watched his father handle financial stress by shutting the office door and refusing to speak for hours. Leo absorbed that action. He didn't just see it, he mapped it into his behavioral repertoire. We observe others and they fill our consciousness, providing templates for what is possible. The second is the taken role. Within any relationship, you are forced to play a specific part in a script you didn't write. When Leo was with his mother, he was always the fragile protector, the one who had to be quiet so she wouldn't get a headache. He didn't just act like a protective child, he became a protective child in that space. When he was with his younger brother, he became the authoritative guide. Each relationship dragged a completely different version of Leo into existence. The third, and perhaps most profound, is the choreography. Think of learning to dance the tango. You don't just learn your own steps, you learn the coordinated movement of the pair. You know exactly how the dance flows when your partner moves left, or when they dip. Human life is an ongoing series of these choreographies. We learn the choreography of an argument, the exact moment to raise our voice, the exact moment the other person will sigh, the exact rhythm of the silence that follows. We learn the choreography of lovemaking, of casual small talk, of workplace hierarchy. By the time Leo reached adulthood, he had participated in thousands of these relational dances. He was a repository of immense potential. And here's the radical truth that Gergen exposes. Because you are a multi-being built by diverse relationships, you harbor the potential for everything and its absolute opposite. Every peaceful person carries the exact choreography required to engage in hate talk. Every devout believer carries the latent understanding of sin. Every responsible adult possesses the precise know-how for corruption and childishness. We are not stable. We are fragile agreements held together entirely by the pressure of our ongoing relationships. We walk through the world presenting fragments of ourselves, and we mistakenly call those fragments whole personalities. But what happens when the local agreements that keep us stable begin to fracture? What happens when the world stops affirming the dances we know how to perform? It started with a minor divergence. One afternoon, during a high-stakes team meeting, Leo felt an overwhelming surge of exhaustion. Instead of performing his usual role, the eager, hyper-rational strategist, he faltered. He expressed a raw, unpolished doubt about a project. His phrasing was awkward, his tone slightly cynical, his demeanor heavy. In our hyper-accelerated modern world, human beings are under immense pressure. We are bombarded by 1,000 oughts from the media and technology: how we must look, how efficient we must be, what music we should like. We are constantly running out of time. And because time is scarce, modern society has a very low tolerance for anyone who disrupts the smooth machinery of social performance. We avoid people who are slow or bothersome or complicated. It's nothing personal. It's just individualist self-preservation. And so Leo's coworkers did what most people do. They subtly avoided him. They didn't confront him. They just stopped stopping by his desk. They left him off the casual lunch invite. This is the moment the trap snapped shut. Gergen calls this trajectory progressive isolation. It is a circular, self-sustaining vortex. Leo's sense of being an okay human being, his very internal stability, was never an internal engine. It was an ecosystem that required the subtle, daily affirmations of social life. The energetic greeting, the shared laugh at the water cooler, the simple acknowledgement of his presence. When those affirmations vanished, Leo was left floating in a sea of toxic uncertainty. His mind began to ruminate. Did I do something wrong? Why are they treating me like this? Are they laughing at me? To protect himself from the agony of rejection, Leo dug deep into his multi-being repository and pulled out a defensive, ancient role. He told himself, I don't care about them anyway. I am a person of deep creative complexity, and they are just superficial corporate drones. But a reality created in total isolation cannot survive. Because Leo stopped hanging out with others, he cut off the only source of validation that could break his dark thoughts. His self-questioning intensified into uncontrollable loops. He began to live out his private, unverified reality. He stopped shaving. He wore wrinkled, mismatched clothes to work. He became cynical, sharp and cold in his interactions, unconsciously wanting to punish the people who had excluded him. His outer behavior began to match his inner wounds. The coworkers saw this hostility and thought, see, we were right to avoid him. Look how unstable he is. The loop was complete. Minor doubt led to social avoidance. Avoidance triggered defensive hostility. Hostility justified further rejection. Leo was spinning into a vortex of isolated self-torment, completely trapped by a script that was rewriting him every day. When progressive isolation didn't completely numb the pain, Leo sought refuge in the one relationship he had left, his partnership with Clara. But here he fell headfirst into the second great trap of the multi-being, the constricted reality. Normally, we have access to hundreds of different ways of being, but when a relationship becomes stressed, our behavioral options shrink until we are entirely de-skilled. Leo and Clara had fallen into a degenerative choreography. It was an old, bitter routine they had practiced so many times it felt entirely natural. Clara would ask a simple question about his day. Leo would hear it as an accusation of failure. He would respond with a sarcastic, defensive bite. Clara would withdraw into icy silence. Leo would slam a door. Leo wanted to scream out that he loved her. He wanted to pull out the warm, vulnerable version of himself that used to laugh with her on the floor of their first apartment, but he couldn't find the steps to that dance anymore. He had honed the practice of argumentation and withdrawal so deeply that his muscle memory overrode everything else. He was completely de-skilled. He mistook the angry, defensive self of the moment for his entire identity. And underneath this toxic dance with Clara lay a much darker, invisible force, the ghosts of past relations. As multi-beings, we don't just carry current relationships, we carry the unerasable recordings of our past. For Leo, the loop inside his head was an unfinished script. Decades ago, he had been subjected to voices of authority that told him he was fundamentally inadequate. Because he was a child, he could never offer an adequate reply, a refusal, or a counterattack. The argument was suspended in time. Now, 30 years later, whenever Clara expressed a minor frustration, Leo wasn't actually hearing Clara. The script in his head instantly hijacked the moment. He was projecting the face of his critical father onto his partner. He was locked in a private fortress of self-righteousness and resentment, fighting a war against a ghost from 1996, while the real woman sitting in front of him was weeping in the dark. He was trapped, isolated from his peers, deadlocked with his partner, and haunted by his past. When Leo finally sought help, he expected what most people expect from therapy: a label, a diagnosis, a single school treatment plan, perhaps a cognitive behavioral ledger to fix his broken thoughts, or a psychoanalytic deep dive to label his depression. But Dr. Evans didn't view Leo as a broken mechanism. She understood the theory of the multi-being. She knew that because Leo's suffering was relational, his healing had to be relational too. She practiced what Gergen calls reflective eclecticism. She didn't use a pre-scripted manual. Instead, she asked herself, what specific form of coordinated action does this man's multi-being need to take flight again? First, she broke through his progressive isolation. When Leo shared his darkest, most incoherent thoughts of resentment and self-loathing, Dr. Evans didn't analyze them or evaluate his sanity. She didn't ask him if a random object on her desk was an ashtray to test his cognitive functioning. She responded into his story world. She accepted his metaphors. She offered him absolute, unconditional validation as a legitimate participant in reality. She became the collaborative friend his ecosystem was starving for. For the first time in months, Leo felt the physical relief of being affirmed. Second, she tackled the ghosts of his past. She introduced an innovative practice developed by narrative therapists. She had Leo sit down and write an unvarnished letter to his father, voicing all the unanswerable anger he had bottled up for 30 years. Then she had him do something terrifying, write a reply letter as if he were his father. By stepping into the model of his past oppressor, Leo was able to see the old man not as an all-powerful judge, but as another flawed multi-being who was likely playing out his own traumatic scripts. The loop was finished. The grip of the ghost was released. To take away the crushing power of his core traumas, Dr. Evans utilized the ancient Buddhist practice of shikanho. She had Leo summon the memory of his worst failures and then instructed him to look at the scene from entirely different physical angles every 2 seconds, from high above, from below, from a mile away. Within minutes, the memory ceased to be a commanding dictator. It became just something that happened. The trauma lost its weight because its vantage point had changed. Finally, because Leo had become completely de-skilled at love, Dr. Evans shifted her role one last time. She stopped asking questions and became a teacher. They literally role-played communication techniques, practicing how to express fear and need without using the rusted automatic weapon of anger.
The changes didn't happen overnight, and they didn't happen because Leo found a mystical, singular, true self. They happened because he realized he was a butterfly that required 2 wings to fly. He learned to forgive himself for being inconsistent. He understood that being a different person with his boss, his friends, and his partner wasn't a sign of hypocrisy. It was a sign of human richness. He stopped trying to force the kaleidoscope of his mind into a single, rigid gray stone. You are not a single, unyielding entity trapped in a hostile world. You are an ever-shifting horizon of everyone you have ever loved, ever fought, ever met, and ever remembered. If you feel conflicted, disorderly, or fragmented, do not despair. You are simply alive. Stop searching for who you are and start celebrating the myriad potentials of what you can become. This narrative was adapted from the academic research of Dr. Kenneth J. Gergen, specifically his paper, Therapeutic Challenges of Multi-Being. The original study has been structured into this narrative format to make its foundational concepts more accessible, and the full paper is available for further reading via the link in the description below.